everybody. Good morning. Okay, I'm just waiting for the notification that this is up and working properly. Looks like it. Okay. So good morning. My name is Maddie. I am the Character Integrity Chair responsible for trainings with a Moment of Magic. And today I just wanted to paint with you guys. I am hoping we will get some lovely people joining us. So if you have any questions, you can comment them down below. So to give people a little bit of time to tune in, I just want to talk for a minute to kind of go over like what I'm doing, particularly with my setup and what I have recommended for you. So let's see if I can get a picture of what I am going to be painting in the comments for you guys. Not sure it wants to let me. No. All right, well, I will comment the link to the picture that I am using as a reference because I want you guys to be able to be participatory in any facet that you want to. That's not it. Let's see. Try this real quick. Okay. Here is the link to the picture I am using for reference. And it is a butterfly, and that's what I'm going to show you guys how to paint today. A little bit about my setup. What you're going to need for this is going to be very, very simple. My goal with this is to make it something that anybody who has the ability to just run out to Walmart can go and get taken care of, because most of my regular painting stuff is in another state because of our current situation. So this is going to be a real low-key, easy painting day. So what you're going to need for this are some paints. I am a big advocate for mixing your colors. I don't think that typically we need to buy a ton of colors because that wastes money. So I usually just get our primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. I will get white and black. And then to add like a little bit of a specialness to it and to get some shimmers and shines that you can't otherwise, I will typically get one or two pearlescent pigments or a gold and a silver. If you can get one of those, it can help bring dimension to your artwork that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get with your primary colors. So today I am using only 5, 6, 7 colors, and so we can talk a little bit about mixing. The other thing you're going to need is a paint palette. Again, I am away from all my paint supplies. So what I've done today is I've taken a regular plastic kitchen plate. I do recommend plastic. And I have covered it with some tin foil. That way I can paint on it and it'll be nice and clean, good to go. I don't have to worry about it, but it gives me a nice sturdy structure to paint and mix colors. So you're going to need a paint palette of some kind. You can also even use paper plates are common, but it's not always accessible to everyone right now. You can use I've used cardboard at one point. Like, as long as it's a flat surface and you don't mind getting paint on it, it's no big deal. You're also going to need some acrylic brushes. I just picked these up from Walmart. It's best if you can get a bunch of different brushes and that they are good for whatever kind of paint you plan on using. So today I'm using acrylic paint. It's one of the most common paints that you can get a hold of. But there's also watercolor, oil-based paint, so on and so forth. And I'll talk a little bit about the mediums of paint as we go on. And then the last sort of thing you need, other than obviously something to paint on, is paper towels, or if you are able to do it, a paint rag, because we're trying to save paper towels right now. I do not have a paint rag, but if you have any sort of like old cloth that you're never going to use again, that you don't care if it gets paint or dirty on it, like that's a great one to use. So we got all that together. I've shown you the pictures. Let's talk a little bit about what to wear. I am working with acrylic paint. I highly recommend wearing something that you're unlikely to get paint on, or if you do, you don't mind so much. So I'm wearing an old tee from one of my shows that has like a lot of color on it. If I get paint on it, it's not a big deal. If you do happen to get acrylic paint on something that you're wearing that you care about, I recommend like to get it out. There's lots of stuff for it online, but what you can do is don't rub it in, wait till it dries, pick off as much as you can. And then remember that most acrylic paint is water soluble, so soak it in some water and, last ditch effort, you can use some nail polish remover or acetone to just break it up a little bit. I think those are most of my painting tips and tricks. The very last thing is I'm going to be painting on the floor against the wall because I do not have an easel here, and I want to make sure that you guys can see what I'm doing as I'm doing it. But if you do not have an easel, I really recommend painting on a tabletop. You want a nice flat surface and you don't want your work moving around or being hard to reach. If for whatever reason you are painting on the floor, like that's what you got, you can tape down a trash bag like I did, which you'll be able to see in a second, to sort of give your carpet some protection. And then again, if accidents do happen, you can easily get out the paint in the same way I said. Also, I almost forgot, in our to-do list of things we need, water. You have got to have water to mix things with. Another quick note about this particular paint, I got the cheapest stuff I could, which probably means that it's going to be really, really watery. Really nice acrylic paints are thicker, and that gives you more time to work. Because these are thin, they're probably going to dry quickly, and so there's going to be times that we're sort of rushing to get things to blend or mix, and you might have to go over a couple more layers to get full coverage. I think those are all of my sort of like preemptive rambles. So without further ado, let's get started. I will be glancing at my phone occasionally because that's where the reference picture is for me. But you guys can use your browser. So let's get everyone over here. So I went ahead and sketched just a brief little mock-up of the butterfly we're going to be doing today. You don't have to do this. You can just sort of free wing it if you want. You can print out a picture. If you're not a sketcher person to paint, you can even print out a picture that you want to draw and then trace over it. Like whatever you want to do is totally okay. Don't worry about mine being pre-sketched. It's just going to make things go a little easier, a little smoother, and we can focus on painting. How is going to be the best way to do this? So typically when I'm painting, I like to start with the background and then build on top of it because acrylics are really easy to build on. However, because if you'll see in the reference photo, which I'm not going to duplicate exactly, but I want to get the colors, this background wing part is black, and I am going to want to paint over that to get some nice design. So I want to put the black down first just because I want to make sure it's really dry and I can get over top of it without any streaking whatsoever. So I'm just going to start by taking the plastic off of the paint. And let me see if I can put on, I really like to have relaxing music in the background when I paint, so I'm going to put on my favorite sort of hour loop. It's called River Flows in You by, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Yurma, who is a piano artist. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to hear it, but I'm hoping it won't just be me talking. Okay. So I'm going to start with just a bit of black. Just a little bit, because that's kind of overpowering. Okay, so I'm put just a little bit of black on my makeshift paint palette. And I'm going to take, given the size of my canvas, a medium-sized brush, and I'm going to wet it. You don't have to start by wetting your paints, but I haven't used this particular sheen before, so I don't know how well it's going to spread or anything yet, and so I don't want to start completely bone dry. There'll be techniques for that later. Let's see. We'll use this brush. So we'll do it like a makeup artist. This sort of medium-sized brush in proportion to my hand. And I'm just going to wet it in a little bit of water, dip it in the black, and see what we're working with here. So this is very, very watery. Also, as we go, if you guys have any questions, I'll try to keep an eye on the comments and I can answer them. I'm going to try to dry out my brush a little bit because we did not need water for that one. And again, I think when you're painting, one of the most important things to know is like, it doesn't really matter how well it looks. I try not to go for realism because I don't think I do that really well. So I just try to enjoy myself and paint something that at the end of the day, I think is really nice and that I'm going to enjoy. Sometimes I think my paintings turn out really well, and sometimes it looks like my baby cousin could have done it. And both are okay. I hang both of them up. So I'm just going around sort of the areas where I wanted to have those sort of bright, symmetrical pink splotches of color. And I'm not really using any particular technique here. I'm just taking a little bit of paint at a time. I don't want this to get too soupy wet. And once I get these larger areas, I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush to try to get in between and get in closer without completely losing my guideline. If you ever paint, I can show you guys what I'm doing. You can just tap some of it off. You might be able to pick up some later. I try to work in small little clusters around and save the big middle for mixing a bunch of different colors. Throughout this tutorial, I might get up and get more foil to keep going. You know, it doesn't really matter as long as you're doing what feels good to you. If you are stroking up and down like I am, try to keep it in one direction, at least till you get pretty full coverage. There will be small little brush lines in it when you're done, and it tends to look better if they're all going the same way. And you'll notice that I'm leaving, at least I hope you can notice, yeah, there's this very thin patch of white in between the two wings that I'm leaving unpainted right now. And that's going to be a note to me to go in later and add some dimension right there. I don't want to lose that spot because black covers completely. If you are painting along with me and you want to post whatever you're doing in the comments, that would be really cool. I'd love to see what we're all working on together. All right, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush now. Another reason why it might not be great to start with black unless you have a plan in place is the black, it's really hard to clean out of your brush, and when you go to wash it in your water, you're immediately going to get that back. So I try to have at least one paper towel sheet clean to sort of, or on hand to clean the brushes as I go. I'm gonna have to wet this one a little bit because it's very stiff. I'm using boar bristle brushes, I believe. Yes. And sometimes you'll find that they get really stiff when you first get them, so you have to soak them in a little bit of water. So what I'm doing with this one that came out really stiff is a little bit of water, and then in the paper towel, I'm just like, I don't want to bend it, I don't want to fray the edges, but I'm just sort of working the fibers just a little, just so they're flexible. You don't want it to lose all of that stiffness, but you want to get a little bit more give so that it can actually move the paint. So then you dry your brush off and just get back to it. One of my favorite things about working with acrylic is it is okay if you go outside of the lines. It will all cover each other. You can layer it beautifully. You just have to wait for it to dry in between. And as you are layering your acrylic, you can typically scratch it off as you go. If it gets a little out of place and you just want to clean up a small bit. Now, in my sketch, I smoothed over the edges of these pink splotches that we're going to do. But in my final one, my goal is going to be to really just spread them out so it looks a little bit more natural and not so perfectly rounded. But if you prefer that more cartoony, symmetrical, perfectly round shape, then that is a-okay, perfectly fine to do. Again, art of any kind is about, seeing your vision come together. So there's no rules, just like tips and tricks. Change my position so you're getting more my back. Now, if you're trying to choose between working on an easel or working on a table, like what's right for you, I think easels are really great for allowing you to have better posture while you're painting. So if you ever have issues with your back of any kind, that's a good pro it has. But if you're like me and you have really shaky hands naturally, I find working on a table is best because you do have the support of the table itself. And you can work on the little details easier. I had a professor, I wasn't really a professor because at this point I was in high school. I had an art teacher who once told us in our class that you should always paint, draw, use your medium to show what you see, not what you think should be there. And I think, if you're going for realism, that might be more of an approach. Personally, in my totally non-professional opinion, I found like a mix of that is a good idea. So paint what you see for sure, but also if something doesn't look right to you, it's your painting, it's going on your wall, you can adjust it so that way it looks most pleasing to you. Because you're going to notice if something feels off in your work more than anyone else will. So my rule then, in the medium of no rules, is to paint what you see until it looks really wrong and then adjust it until you're happy with it. So as we get to the end of this video and I'm putting in more of the finishing details, I'll talk you all through what I'm seeing, what I like, what I don't like, what I want to try to do to make it look and feel better. I typically don't go into a project with a plan in place, at least not a big one. I knew with this one I wanted to start with the black for the reasons I've mentioned and then do the background and sort of fill in on top of that. But that's all I had. I like to just work as I go. I cannot really splotchy, but that is okay. We can fix it. Okay, so the top portion looks pretty good. I'm gonna move into the veins on the bottom. Now, for whatever reason, in the reference photo, you'll find that the veins in the bottom are much bigger, more significant. I'm not really sure why that is. I sketched mine similarly. But if you don't like that look, you don't have to do it. I didn't really have feelings about it one way or the other, so I went with it. I'm going to add a little bit of water to this bit here because it is drying up on me. And as we go, we can talk a little bit about color theory, not much, but enough to help you mix any color you're really trying to work with. Because I don't think anyone should be dependent on what the store has to get the image they want. And as you're going, if you want to change something, you have the complete authority to do so. So right in here, for example, there's some sort of overlapping with the pink panels. And I'm not really liking it. I don't think it feels as good as the rest of the painting. So I'm gonna add a thicker vein in there just to separate it out. Because to me, that's gonna look really nice. Now, one brush will give you a bunch of different strokes, depending on how hard you push down on it. So if you want to do a much thinner line, make sure you're using very light strokes, barely touching the canvas or the paper. If you're going for a thicker blob line, whatever you're going for, you're really going to want to stick to thicker strokes with more pressure to spread out the pigment. Because both are going to give you more control in each respective department. Now I'm getting into a trickier area. I'm going to see if I have an even smaller brush. I don't think I do, but I'd really like one. Are you smaller or larger? You're larger. No, so we're going to keep going. But I would recommend taking your smallest brush for this middle section where you have some of those shapes starting to overlap and get really small. Same for the ends, like right down here. And then just go nice and slow with it. You're not on anybody else's schedule. This is your time to be creative. Now, one of the reasons I chose a butterfly where you're only really seeing one wing is because I think symmetry is beautiful, but it's really hard. And when you're working with something in nature like a butterfly that has beautiful bilateral symmetry, you really in my personal opinion, I find it hard to do that justice. My symmetry skills aren't that great. And so I find it easier to work when I don't have to feel pressured to do that by myself mostly. So I'm adding a little bit more water as we go, just because I want to keep a better point on my brush. Just not really giving me. I'm gonna look at the bigger brush and hopefully that's stiff too. And if it is, we're just gonna use the tip of that. Ah, good. So something that you can do with a stiff brush is just use the tip like a dotting tool. Now, if you don't have a brush like that or you don't have a dotting tool, what I'll then do is take the back end of the brush, the smallest one I have again, dip that in a little bit of paint, and then you can drag lines and dot with it. It's gonna take a little bit more paint and work to do it that way, but I personally find it helps me get in with those details. So I'm just going to sort of dot my way through some of these smaller spaces. Just like this. That's great. I find when I'm painting, one of the things I want most is control over my work. But if you ever feel like it's getting away from you, that's all right too. Now this area in here, I'm gonna actually try to make gray. Not because it's like that in the picture, but because I want a little bit of distinction. So I'm gonna actually leave this little triangle blank for now. I kind of closed it off, but what I'm gonna wanna do is get rid of that thick border because over my time with painting, I have come to that I don't really love having thick black outlines on my work. I really try to get in there with shading so it looks like it has more of a natural edge, like something you would see. But if you want to do a thick black border, that's all right, because that is how I started. I'm going to work the edges with this tool as well. So I'm actually not going to wet this brush again unless I really need it for another part of this painting, because I want to keep it rigid and I'm going to continue to use it in this way throughout the painting. I really like painting because it gives me time to be quiet and reflective on my own thoughts, which is not really the best example for right now because I'm trying to be extra talkative. But I don't know about you guys at home, but I'm someone who really struggles to just sit still and be quiet. And so having something that allows me to sit and be quiet, even if I'm doing something, is a great sort of medium for me. And in this case, I mean medium, like middle ground. Important distinction when we're doing any kind of art. So I've almost got all of my veins done here. I'm just going to finish up this bottom. And then another place where I'm going to want to do this is with the antennae. Oh gosh, I completely forgot what it's called. It's not stamen, but that little curly nose bit on a butterfly. I'm going to remember this the second the live stream is over. But we're gonna do that at the end. And what I might even do is come in with a Sharpie and do it. We'll see how we're feeling. Sometimes if I have very thin black details, I'll come in with a Sharpie and do them instead of trying to get my paint to cooperate with me. It typically blends in really well. It's a little shinier, I think, than most matte acrylic paints, but it works. Almost there. And as I'm coming in on the abdomen of her butterfly, I'm just doing something thin, quick. And I'm actually going to touch up this last little bit in here before we move on to the background. Okay. And so throughout this project, I'm going to encourage you to stop, take a step back and look at it and see if there's something else you want to do. So I'm stopping, looking. I'm pretty happy with how this looks right now. It's a little bit more rough around the edges than I think my camera is picking up on, but that is perfectly fine. So I'm going to keep this last one that I was using dry. I'm going to clean off the tip as much as I can. Just going to set that down. And then the other two I was using are going to go in the water. Just let that soak off. So our background is this sort of beautiful forest green. And then this, my knee is in the way. This stem of the flower is a lighter green. And so with the paint that we have, we need to make sure that we have a distinction in color. So I'm going to shoot for this stem to be a very yellow green and for the background to be a deeper green. I'm not sure if you can tell, but just jumping ahead a little bit, when we get to the flower, I've gone for more of a rose / tulip family flower, just because I'm not sure how I feel about the flower that butterflies on. It doesn't inspire me, and I don't feel like I can really necessarily do it justice. This flower is going to be difficult because we have to add a lot of layers and do shading, but I like these types of flowers, so we're going to try it and see how we feel. And if it ends up, instead of being like a white blob, a pink blob, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to start in on this background color, and I want a lot of paint because, again, this stuff isn't going to go the furthest. Now, typically when I do backgrounds, I'm a huge fan of gradations going down or up. For those of you who don't know, because I'm trying to make this a rudimentary tutorial, a gradation or gradation, if I'm emphasizing the A, is when you have one color that gradually turns into another. So it would be if I had blue on one end, and red on the other, and in the middle they became purple, and you had all the individual steps leading up to each. You don't have to do it with colors that have a natural middle ground. You can mix any number of colors and just blend them into one another, but you want it to look very smooth. But with this particular background, I kind of want to do like a speckled thing. So I want some areas to be a deeper green. I want some areas to have like a little bit of yellow into it. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't know for sure how I want to make that happen. I think one of the best ways I can do this is I'm going to take my two biggest brushes. And it looks like I only have one large brush and all the others are about the same size. And that's okay. I'm going to make the main green background color, and I'm going to use the big brush for that. And then I'm going to make a slightly lighter, more yellow color. Again, not the same that we're going to do for the stem, with the smaller brush. And then we're going to quickly sort of blend them into each other as we go. So we're going to need a decent amount of paint of both, but more of the base green. So I'm going to start. Always close your acrylics when you're done with them. So I'm going to start with our green color. I really should have taken all the plastic off of these beforehand. I didn't think about it. Something I learned the hard way this time around is, I don't know if it's all acrylic paint or just this particular brand, but try not to leave your paints in a warm spot for too long, too hot or too cold. I know if you leave them in a really cold place, they can crack and freeze. But if you put them in a hot car, as it turns out, they'll explode on you, which is why all of these are covered in paint, even though they haven't been open. There we go. All right, so I'm going to start with yellow and just get a good portion down here on my plate. Ooh. Okay, so I'm going to tilt it as much as I can, but this is a little runny. And I'm going to start by making a second one of those two. Smaller little blob. And I'm just going to add in some blue to each. Let me show you guys kind of what I'm doing. So I'm going to start with just a little in each and see what colors we're getting. Remember, if you're doing this the way that I am, to mix with the proper brush for each, but you don't have to do it this way. You can also just paint the background one color, whatever, again, is going to make you really happy. So with green, a little bit of blue goes a really long way. In my mind, green is mostly yellow, and as you go, it'll start turning into like blue-green the more blue you add. So this is the current green color, and on camera, it actually looks more yellow than it does in person. I'm going to add a little more blue to this, but this sort of color is what I'm going to try to make that one be. And I'm just going in with a dry brush right now, but I'll probably wet it as we go because having a wet brush, at least in my experience, has made this an easier time. So I'm going to add a little more blue to this one. And if you're having trouble getting the saturation you want, like if it's too dark or too light, you can then add white and black to it to give you whatever sort of color you want. So now we're getting into, as it's mixing, it looks a little blue-green, and it's okay if it does, like I'll keep that. But this is closer to what I want. I might add a touch of black into this. I don't think I will today, but it's always an option. So we're gonna set this straight down on that. So I'm not gonna be able to show you the mixing of this one, but it's gonna look very similar. And I'm actually gonna add a touch more yellow to this one. And I think a little bit of white, actually, because I want it to really be vibrant and different. And then something I'll do at the end is take a little bit of gold and dry brush it over the background. That might be a really nice touch. There we go. So the little bit of white I put in, and I just put in a drop, gave me another very nice green. So I'm going to hold these separately and try to show this. So again, the screen's kind of browning the colors out a little bit. I'm sorry about that, but we have a much more vibrant green here and a lighter green. They're definitely related. These would blend well together anyway, but they're different. So I'm going to start in by taking my very full paintbrush, and I totally realize this could get on my wall and I don't want to do that. I'm going to put the paintbrushes down. Yeah, try not to get paint on your wall. Recommendation number one. So I'm just gonna put some paper towel behind it with masking tape. Please do not put any real tape on your walls or carpet. It doesn't work as well, and it doesn't come up as nicely. Now, typically, I like to paint around the thick edges of a canvas as well, but what I found at the store were these really thin canvases, like millimeter thick. So I don't need to do that. I'll probably wrap the paint as I go. So now I'm going to take my very full brush. I'm just going to start strokes. Now, again, this is thin acrylic. It will dry quickly, so you need to work quickly. This is why we put stuff on the wall. So as it starts getting thin, I'm just going to pop in the other color for a little splash of it. And I'm just going to repeat this technique as we go, blending the edges together. And personally, I like sort of airy, whipsy background, so you can make this as sort of messy as you want. I personally think it looks really good that way. And just make sure you're touching the edges together so that they blend nicely. You don't want hard lines between the colors. Let's see, I'm going to put a little bit more of this down here. A lot more of this down here. Now, as you get closer to, I guess, your main subject of the matter, try not to make it nearly as messy. I really wish the colors could show up for you guys a bit better because this is such a vibrant, pretty color. Now, a problem that I almost always run into when painting is I never mix enough of the color that I want. I never anticipated, right? Which is why it's important to keep an eye on how you're colors, how much of each color you're using, so that way if you need to mix more, which in my case I almost always do, you're able to. Sometimes I think this is the most fun part of my paintings, because I get to really do things without caring. I'm someone who cares a lot about most things. It's just a really nice breather. And remember to keep blending the colors as you go on the edges. And remember, you're not trying to please anybody else with what you're doing. This is just about what's going to make you happy. But this part's just like makeup. You want to blend like crazy. So as we get closer, I'm going to just be really careful and kind of, instead of doing that wispy motion, do more of a blotchy motion around the artwork with the different colors. And one thing you'll notice is as I'm doing this, I'm mixing a wet and dry brush effect. I'm letting my brush really dry out as I go in between. And like I'll dip in for more paint, but the goal with this is to keep it airy, keep it light. I'm going to blend this in a little more. Come in some more of their face green. I feel like I'm actually not getting as much of the base color as I'd like. Now, also remember that acrylics build on top of one another really quickly, and because these are thin, or really easily, and because these are thin, this dries faster, so you can also go in and add more of your blending color in between if that's something you want to do. Okay, now I'm just more blotching it as I get closer. So I don't want to get this all over my beautiful black. I will definitely go in and touch it up though as I end. When you're painting, just as like a general rule, so now we're going to scratch off. So I got a lot of green on the tip of my black there. So I scratched it off. I have a little bit of black that's stuck on the tip of our dotting tool. I'm just going to go right back into it. What was I saying? Oh, so as you're painting, I highly recommend working furthest away from you to closest to you, especially if you're doing this on a easel or if you're sitting on the floor like me against your wall. The reason for that is, especially with me, I lean my hand against my work a lot and I don't want to get paint all over my hand. I will, I already have, but that'll transfer throughout your painting. So what I'm trying to do is work away from me, then towards me. And that way, I have less of a chance of getting a mess everywhere. So I'm gonna need more of the other color, and that's really frustrating because this is gonna dry fast. So I'm gonna stop talking for just a second and try to mix up some more really quickly. I definitely put too much white in this time, but that's okay. And I'm gonna do a little bit more of the other color too, just so we have more. Okay, that's okay. So I'm using up a lot of my yellow right now. But I think we're gonna have plenty of paint. Now, sometimes as I'm doing this, I'll make too much of a paint color, which may be what happens here. And so if that is the case, what I'll probably do is take these green colors and then use them to make the stem and the other colors. But just try to enjoy yourself as you're going. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're going for something pretty. Now, even if you're using a reference photo like I am, you don't have to use the, if you don't like the color of this butterfly, do something else that's going to fill you with more joy. I actually chose this picture because I really liked the colors. I think it goes with a lot of other things that I've been using. That's still not quite bright enough. We're going to have a lot of bright color now. And that's okay. We'll find a way to use it. So the colors aren't perfect matches, and that's going to be okay. Because it's just going to add to that sort of chaotic, wispy effect we were going for. As my brush dries out, I'll go ahead and try to do more of that. There we go. Now it's blending a little better. I'm just wrapping around the sides as I go. Personally, I think I like that look better on a finished canvas. Got some more on the butterfly, so I'm just scratching it off. Works pretty good. Sorry for this quiet portion of the tutorial. Takes a little bit of focus to be working quickly like this. My darker shade. Again, I'm going back to blotching. Oh, let the record show most of the terms that I'm using are not like the technical correct terms. I am not an art aficionado. I just enjoy painting. And that's the point. You don't need to be an expert in anything to do it. You don't need to be the best singer in the world to sing. You don't need to be a great piano player to like play fun little tunes. I think we as a culture have gotten this idea in our heads that if you can't master something, you shouldn't do it. And I don't think that's the best mindset. So now that our background's pretty much full, what you may or may not be able to tell through there, so you can kind of see it a little bit over here, is there's some patchiness that'll come through. And so I'm going to go back over those patchy places and just continue to try to blend, add in a little more paint. This background has also turned out a little bit brighter than I thought it would. So I might actually take a different approach and go for like a really dark stem. We'll see. This is really beautiful. I'm actually so happy with how this is turning out. Now what I'm going to do here, these are the legs of the butterfly, and that's really hard for you guys to see. So when this is all finished, I'll come back in. I'm going to lightly paint over them so that I can still see my pencil lines, but we're putting a background in there. Typically acrylic will be full coverage, but if you go really thin like I am here, you should still be able to make out your references. because we don't want a patchy background. Now, if you're using brand new 4-bristle brushes, one thing you might run into is occasionally the fibers from the brushes will come out and land on your painting. You can take, like, if you have any nail at all, the tips of your fingers and pluck them out. I actually leave them in there, especially if it's in the background. I don't mind how it looks. And I'd rather not get paint all over the place. So I leave mine in, but you do whatever feels best to you. So here I have a lot of my lighter color. And I'm just gonna kind of dry brush some more of that one over it. Over here, it's looking a little patchy. So I'm going to take my dark color and just sort of come in on top of that. And I'm just using a little bit of paint as I go over here. I'm not trying to make more of a impact on it. I'm just trying to sort of fill in the cracks. Continue to blend it. And anywhere that just looks a little weird, go ahead and touch it up again. Like anything that you're not a huge fan of, you can change. And you're just going to want to keep going back and forth until you're satisfied, wherever that is for you. There's no right or wrong answer to that. Biologically, we all see the world in different ways, so that's why art and expression is so subjective. Just remember to be using those really light strokes to blend in. A little bit of white space up in here. I'm going to take the back of my thicker paintbrush and just sort of fill in that space. This does take a while, so be patient with yourself. I'm going to take that little paintbrush from earlier, make sure all the black is out of it. Dab it on a paper towel to be sure, because we don't want any black into this background. You just fill it in. So I'm purposely getting a little messier here with my butterfly because I really want the background to come right up to it. So right after this, I'm going to go in with more black and just touch that up again so that it'll be ready. Okay, so we've again reached another moment where I'm going to tell you to, okay, stand back, look at your work. Are you happy with it? Is there anything you want to change? And for me, I want to change this little area right here. It just doesn't look quite right to me. So I'm going to go in with my big brush with just a little bit more paint and blend it out a little bit. Try to make it look nice and flowy. And in this area, I could use just a little bit more blending. At this point, I'm not really picking up much more paint as much as I am just glazing over the areas that are still a little wet and spreading that out. Okay. So once again, take a step back, look at your work. Are you happy with it? I'm really happy with this background. I think it looks really cool. I think it captures the essence of the original while still being something unique to me. Once again, I did get paint all over myself. One of the tips I forgot to at the beginning of this was to make sure you're not using or wearing a lot of jewelry, because you will get stuff all over it. So right now I'm just rinsing the paintbrushes that I have used. At this point, your water will be pretty gross colored. So you just want to use your paper towels, again sparingly, or your paint rag, and try to get both the colored water and the color out of them. I'm purposely not wearing, I'm wearing shorts for a reason. And the reason I'm wearing shorts is because one thing I do is when I'm trying to make sure I've gotten all the paint out of something, in addition to getting it on the paper towel, then rub it on my leg and see if I'm getting any pigment coming off on my skin, because acrylic is real easy to get off your skin. You can literally peel it up. If you have sensitive skin, however, I do not recommend that technique for you. Use a paper plate or a piece of paper or something else. So I now have my brushes mostly clean. They don't need to be 100%. I'm going to put my water back. And as you can see here, we have a ton of green left. So I'm going to take, I don't want to lose all that paint. So I'm actually going to mix them together and then add either white or black to it. And then maybe a gold to sort of give it a little something different. So I'm going to take another brush. This is just going to be a smaller brush. Well, I'm going to mix with a smaller brush and then paint with a medium pointed brush. So this is going to be my medium pointed brush that I'm going to use to paint. And then I'm just going to mix, well, I'll mix with the same brush I did for the secondary color in the background. So I'm going to take the two paint colors just as much as I can and meet them in the middle, because I don't want to waste this if I can help it. And we're getting a really nice, pretty light green. And since it's already so light, I think what I personally want to do is add some white and gold to this to just sort of brighten it up more and make it stand out from the background. So I'm using a decent amount of white and just a little bit of gold. And I'm actually going to reset this. Okay. We're getting there, guys. As soon as we add like the color, it'll be all kinds of good. And I just want to remind you guys, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Like if you feel inspired to do something else, if you have a paint knife and you want to use it, that's okay too. That was a good idea. The gold was a great idea because now we're getting some really pretty dimension in here. So I'm going to use more gold and more white because that's not quite where I want it to be. Now there's some parts in here left that are a little bit darker. I'm going to take my smallest brush from the black earlier. I'm going to quickly scoop up some of those darker bits of green and just come in where the leaf tips are and just sort of hit those. Unfortunately, it's kind of blending into the background right now. So I'm going to take some of this and add black to it on another part of the canvas. That way we'll have a shadow color to work with. So I'm just going to do the leaves in that color. That way when the stem goes through it, it'll be really nice. And all I'm doing is adding, I took a little bit of the color I showed you guys earlier and added in some black. Oh, this is hard to do sitting up. And my best advice for this bit is to just keep mixing until you're happy with what you're getting. It's not rocket science, it's purely experimental. I'm kind of okay with that, and I'm just going to come under the main flower a bit with this color too, because I feel like flowers typically have that. And now I'm going to put those brushes that I used to mix and put that aside, just on my trash bag. Like they're going to get painty everywhere, and that's okay. And now I'm going to take this other color I've mixed up and just apply that as the stem. So this was the green mixed with black, and this is mixed with the white and the gold. Now again, I'm going to put that down and just take this clean brush that I showed you earlier, dip it in there. This is also one of the firmer ones, and that's good because I want this to be nice and smooth. There we go. I really like how this is turning out. Okay, so I've got my stem, and I'm just going to go to the center of my little leaves. I don't love how they're turning out, but that's okay. I'm going to see if I can clean up this little blob I made because I'm not real happy with that. I'm just going to drag this up through the center. And that's okay. It's not perfect, but that is all right. And then I'm going to take that shadow color I was using for the leaves and just drop it down toward the underside of the stem. This is going to give it a little bit more dimension, make it look 3D. Optional step entirely. I just know I really like the way that looks. And it's hard when you have so many greens on top of each other. So if you want to make your stem blue, you make your stem blue. Like I said, I didn't have a huge plan when I was going in with this thing. It's just figuring it out as you go. I'm probably going to add more black and actually give this one a little bit more of an outline just to separate it out. So what I'm going to do is take my black dotting tool from earlier, dip it in the black, and just go around the edges, and then I'm going to blend that in. Because I don't want a big, thick black line. I just want enough that it tells our brain this is something different. And I'm going to dry brush to blend. That looks a lot better. I really like that. And again, just like the background, you're going to go back and forth until you find what you're happy with. And I'm okay with that. I think I'm actually going to go up the center with the black now. And then again, just clean up as you go. Your goal isn't perfection, just whatever you're happy with. Okay, so I'm all right with that. Now I'm going to go into the fun part. We have a lot of green left on our palette, so I'm just going to work on this side. I'm going to clean up any splotches that happened. And now we're going to go in for the pink. So I'm going to take all of the brushes, except for the one that I'm using for black, and get them all cleaned off and pull out my red. Now, this pink is kind of like a magenta, vibrant color. All of these are so hard to open. but we're making it work. And because it's sort of that magenta-y color, I'm using mostly red, but I'm also going to use a little bit of blue and a little bit of black to kind of deepen the color. And I'm going to touch it with just a little bit of silver, because I think that's going to add some nice dimension. Okay, so just a little bit of silver. Okay. You guys can see that little mixture. I'm going to take a medium small brush. We're going to do this one. And if at any point you feel like your paint's too cloudy, you can change out the color. I'm not going to worry, or change out the water. I'm not going to worry about that right now. Interesting. So I'm getting a very mauve-y purple color. Because of all the black. I think I'm going to add more red, and because it's such a vibrant red, hopefully that'll just even it out on its own. So I really want this to be a nice, vibrant pink. Okay, we're getting there. I'm going to do a little bit of white now. I think we deepened it a little too much. Now this is a color it's okay to make a lot of because we're going to need it for so much of the butterfly. Everything from the colors in the wings to the thorax and the abdomen all have a little bit of this color. Just keep mixing until you're happy with your color, whatever that is for you. It's your butterfly. So my color is not going to be just like the picture, but that's okay. I've ended up with this really pretty burgundy-ish pink instead of that like hot pink. And then I'm going to take my small brush that I used for the black in the beginning and then for the details in the stem. I'm a big fan of small brushes. And I am just going to start filling in the color. And what I want to do is work from the inside out, because eventually I'm going to splotch the color past the black. Just like this, where I'm going up and I'm letting my brush strokes create those sort of really pretty edges. If you make a mistake here, it's okay. We're going to touch it with black at the very end. Just like this. I think that looks so beautiful. You're just going to do this until you fill in all of them. You're just going to brush out at the ends. And just do your best. Like, it's okay if it's not perfect. That's the benefit of only doing one side of the butterfly. I think it's looking really cool. There we go. Almost there. And we're going to have a lot of leftover paint of this color too. So I'm probably going to try to darken it up into a purple, and then we can use that for the flower. Now, if you're painting with another type of paint, whoops, that one was a bad mess. We're just going to wipe that away. Oil paint in particular. You can also layer oils, but unfortunately it takes forever for those to dry in between. So if you're going to use that, your painting's going to take multiple days. And that's okay. And we're just going to slide in here for this last little one. I'm going to check the reference photo real quick. All right. And now I'm just going to paint the thorax and the head this color too. And we're going to go in and bring the details in with the black. Actually, I'm going to use the dotting tool technique for the head because it's just so small. Just like that. Okay. So now I'm going to come back in with the black and just sort of clean that up all the way around. Oh, that was the wrong color. And remember to work from your thicker spaces to your thinner spaces. Just like this is a great time for you to just fill in the details however you like. Finishing up here. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of tips and tricks for this spot. You're just gonna keep going until you're happy with how it looks with your details. Okay, so we've got our butterfly in a pretty good spot. Now, to go in with those shading colors and for the abdomen and the eye, I'm going to take some black and mix it with just a little bit of blue. I think that's going to give it a nice bit of dimension because you can't really make a shadow for something that's already black. So I'm going to take another brush, and I'm going to use that same dotting tool we've been using for our black for this bit. I'm just going to take some black, some of our blue. And we don't need a lot, just a little bit will be fine. Just enough to make it a real dark blue. Give us a little bit of dimension. There we go. I think that'll do it. So you can see right here, I've mixed my dark blue. It does look pretty black, but it's not quite the same. I'm just going to use that for our detail. So that part. You could also do this with a gray if you prefer. It's entirely up to you. And we're just going to put this in here, my little shadow color. Definitively show the difference between these two wings. That's really pretty. And I'm just going to give us a couple of lines on the abdomen. So we come around the bottom of that. Very nice. Come back in with the green color from earlier. Just a little bit. Smooth it out. Clean brush. Hit it up here too. And I got some pink on my painting, so I'm just going to put that up. This may not be the most fun part about painting for you. I'm not sure. I like going in and making sure the details are the way you want them. But, you know, if this isn't your part, then don't worry about it so much. You can make it however detailed or abstract as you want. bit more black again, just to continue touching it up. Like so. And I'm going to bring this butterfly wing up a little bit. I don't feel like it's connecting the best, and I would like it to. Yeah, just a little bit right there. Makes me happier. Beautiful. Okay, so we are just about done with our butterfly. The last step is going to be to add white around it. So I'm quickly going to add some blue to that beautiful color we made earlier. Until I get a nice pretty purple. And then we're going to paint the flower. And for the rose sort of shape that I'm doing, I usually just start with a blob and then I'll go darker to build the shadows of the different petals. So I've done that. Once again, take my smallest brush. No, let's do a medium brush. And we're just going to go in, give our flower some fundamental shape. Look at that really pretty plum. I'm glad it turned out that way. You never really know. At this point, I'm going pretty off reference, making this my own. But you can try to make it just like. So now that we got our base color there, I'm actually going to take the same color we used for the butterfly because I still have a lot of that left with my smallest brush. And I am just going to try to put in some definition. I'm going to use the back of it and see if I can get that a little bit smoother. And then I'm just coming in underneath with a darker color for shadow. I'm just trying to blend it all together. And for me, this is the part where I'm just trying to do what I think looks right to me. So I want to put a little black right in the center. So I think that would look nice. Some definition there. So we got a nice pretty flower. It's not perfect. It's definitely not a realistic version, but it's not bad. And so I'm just going to come in at an angle and sort of blend through some of these accent lines. And when I go in with the white butterfly, I'm going to add a little bit to the flower too. So our last step, if you've stuck with me this long, is just to take some white and start putting in any accents or other marks that we need. So the first thing that I gotta do is clean off my little brush and put in the little white splotches on the butterfly. And I'm not gonna do this just like the picture. I'm kind of gonna wing it, give it whatever I feel like looks really nice. I think that's gonna make it look a little bit more authentic and natural. Because in nature, it's not really planned. And then I'm just gonna dot tool the tip a little bit. Just like that. I'm gonna actually, again, it's not in the picture, but I'm gonna bring a couple down the front too. So I just think I don't want them to look like perfect little dots, but just a little something. And then we're gonna come around on the back and do much of the same. And you're just gonna do that all around the edges until you have a pretty perfect, when you have something that you're happy with. You have a drop that's a little too heavy. I've had a couple like that. Just pick some of it up and use it elsewhere. touch of my blue-black color and sort of clean up the line between just a and I've successfully gotten some white dots on my green area, so I'm going to once again just take my dry brush and come over here and try to darken that up and blend it back into the background. And I'm actually going to come back in with the dotting just underneath here to really help show the difference between the butterfly and the wing and its abdomen. And then I want to put just a little eye shine on the eye. I don't think that's necessary per se, but I think it would look really nice. And I'm going to come in with just a little bit of highlight on the tips of the flower, where I feel like the sun might hit it. Again, I'm not really going for realism here, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just a little something to give it more dimension. And then just blend it out however you feel. And then we're down to the last little bit of doing the antenna and the eyes. So I am actually going to grab a Sharpie to go ahead and do those because I think that'll be the best. So I grabbed just a regular Sharpie. I'm going to use it to give me two little antennae. I like them curved a little bit. Mouth parts there. And then I'm just going to hit the legs. And in the drawing, our butterfly only has 4 legs, so I'm going to stick with that, not the drawing, the picture. Even though, as insects, they should have 6. So that's up to you how many legs you want to put. Okay. Once again, I've gotten some paint from my hands on the background, so you can just go through again. Clean that up. We've once again reached a place where I want you to look at your background and your painting as a whole, because we're about done. Just, is there anything that you want to touch up, anything you want to change? This is your work, so there's no right or wrong answer to that. Just dry brushing a little bit more on the background to blend in all together. Okay. And I'm really happy with this. I'm going to call it done. So I'll bring it up close for you guys to see. So there's the butterfly. We got some nice shading on the background. there it is as a whole. So the very last step is your signature. I typically do little initials in the bottom corner. You can do this with marker or with paint. There's no right or wrong. The other Sharpie. Might have to do it with paint. My Sharpies don't do it. I'm going to have to add my signature later when it dries better, because right now things aren't working. But I'm just going to add my little signature in the corner. Thank you guys so much for painting with me today. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something, and try to enjoy this time and find something bright and creative to do. Okay. Bye, everybody.